So I sold all of my stuff. Not quite. I guess that's kind of a bald-faced lie. I haven't sold anything, but you can see that it was worth a shot here to maybe get a few clicks on this video to see. But either way, all of my amplifiers and cabinets that are usually behind me from this vantage point have been moved, and there's a very specific reason for that. We did have some water damage in the next room. Luckily, nothing affected this room, but just for safety's sake, I'm going to go ahead and strip all of the interior of this room and kind of start from scratch. That's been a goal of mine for a while, but this water leak in the other room kind of expedited that. So you'll see all of my fun gear here in a few videos, I would imagine. It's probably going to be a couple weeks before I'm back to normal, and I may switch spaces altogether. We'll see. But in the meantime, I pared down to one guitar, one bass. I kept the drum set pretty much intact and all of the microphone array. So we can easily record and get a good sound and continue to make some content even though things are shuffled a bit. But by shuffling things, I've tried to pare down to the smallest possible kit that I could, and that includes this single combo amp, this one Telecaster guitar, one single bass, my Gnome 200 watt little amplifier, that's a little pocket amp, and a 2x12 bass cab that is hooked up to. So I've got one guitar rig, one bass rig, drums, and if I need more, I can always just grab it from the other room. So that's what's going on, but first, we have this little box to unbox. So let's go ahead and see what we've got. So this is actually one of the more classic products that you can buy for guitar. This is the Boss DS-1, the legend, the distortion pedal that really started a legend. This is the ultimate distortion kit. It comes with two of these little 1/4-inch cables to patch it into whatever pedal board you have. So this is the DS-1 Ultimate Distortion Kit. Let's go ahead and open up this box and take a look at what's inside. So you can see we do have those patch cables. Really nice ones. They're Boss branded, so you can guarantee that those are very rigorous cables, and there are two of them in there. We also have our spec sheet and instructions, and looks like the owner's manual is accessible via this QR code, and we also have Boss info, another QR code that is getting started with this product. So there you go, that's what's in the box. Besides our little fellow here, there we go. The orange Boss Distortion DS-1 pedal. This is really a legend amongst heavy metal, rock, you name it. So many records and sounds from the 80s and 90s and 2000s have been used with this specific pedal here. And it's very similar to another pedal that I have on my pedal board, the Boss Turbo Distortion, the DS-2. So we got the DS-1 here, and it's the DS-2 on the pedal board. I believe it's a very similar, if not the same circuit, but it has another dial on it. So maybe this is a little redundant, but this is really the legend, the first pedal that started it all, Boss DS-1. This form factor is pretty well known by now, but if you have never opened a Boss pedal, there is a dial that you just turn to unscrew this little set screw here, and then it opens up this compartment where you can find your 9-volt battery, which this one actually ships with a 9-volt, which I'm kind of surprised by. I'm just going to go ahead and take that right out because I have a 9-volt auxiliary power right on my pedal board that I'm going to plug into this. So I got a free 9-volt, and otherwise this compartment just has a spring and is pretty basic. But this form factor is so ubiquitous just because there are so many Boss pedals on pedal boards all over the world that it's just so recognizable and instantly takes you back to the 80s and 90s, and well, me at least. So let's go ahead and get this on the pedal board and hear what she sounds like. All right, please excuse the untidiness of the board, but I just wanted to slap this on here and get some sounds real quick. So we do have the DS-1 in the first position, kind of after the noise gate, the bad horsey, then into the distortion stack. So we go DS-1, DS-2, chorus, metal zone, Ibanez tube screamer, Boss, super overdrive SD1, and then the Boss looper. And you can see that I can really have an appreciation for the Boss pedal form. I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 on here now. And the only non-Boss pedal is that Ibanez tube screamer, which is certainly one of my favorites as well. So there you go, that's what the pedal board looks like. And this is what we'll be playing through. We have a PV Studio Pro 50. It's a 50 watt solid state amplifier, and our guitar is going to be this gorgeous US Fender Deluxe Telecaster. And I believe this is a 2007 guitar, and this amp is from the 80s, not exactly sure because their serial codes don't tell you much, but it is an 80s amp, 2000s Fender guitar, and otherwise we just have the pedal board to contend with. Our microphone is the Sennheiser E906, a single dynamic microphone just kind of off of the center of the cone of the speaker. Now, if you didn't catch my first video on this particular amp, or maybe it was my second video that I did, but I swapped out the speaker for a Celestion V30. So this is not your standard PV Studio Pro. This is highly upgraded by that speaker choice. It's a 60 watt speaker with a 50 watt load, so we shouldn't have any problems. I think that it really makes a difference in the sound of this amplifier, and hopefully you will enjoy it as well. So let's go ahead and hear what this amplifier sounds like with just itself, and then we'll add the DS-1 and compare it against that DS-2 and some other pedals on the pedal board. Here we go. All right, so everything is plugged in. This Telecaster is being plugged into the pedal board, which again is going through noise gate, bad horsey, into distortion DS1, distortion DS2, super chorus CH1, metal zone MT2, Ibanez tube screamer, super drive SD1, and then finally the loop station. So from the loop station, it's going directly into the guitar, and it sounds like this. So not exactly what I would call Fendery cleans. I would say they do sound PV-ish, if that's a word. I don't think anybody describes anything as PV-ish, but I'm going to start because this is a consistent sound that I've heard from these PV amps. It's not as bright and chimey as a Vox or a Fender. It's much darker, and it's not geared towards metal, but you can hear that that's the early sounds of these metal bands that found these amps and they were like, wow, they don't sound like these chimey Fender things. Let's try to sludge them a little bit. So I think that the distortion pedal pairs really well with this solid state amplifier, and the PV platforms in general, the 5150, the Bandit, the Encore 65, you name it. All of those amplifiers are a little darker than your Fender or some of the more British voiced amps like the Vox. So let's go ahead and hear what this DS-1 sounds like just on its own. We're going to kick it in, and I have all of the knobs to 0. So it's going to kill our sound entirely. But here we go, DS-1. There we go. So let's go ahead and see if I can dial in a good sound on this pedal just from first blush. So I find that the level dial is the most affecting dial. So just by turning the level up and leaving the other two at 0, we're kind of around 70% on the level. Kind of like a tube screamer. It thickens it up a bit. It doesn't overdrive the sound, but again, that's just the level. So let's go ahead and add a little bit of distortion in here. pretty gnarly sounding. We're starting to get in that metal territory with the Stratocaster, but I think that's a little too far in the tone. I bumped the tone and the distortion to about 65%, and that's the sound that this combination gets. So I'm going to bump that tone back and play with the distortion a little bit, and hopefully we can get some more devastating sounds without that ice pick kind of treble boost. It's a little trebly for my ear, so. So that's distortion maxed out at 100%. Level, I had to back down to almost 50%, a little higher than 50, but that's a really good, just kind of gnarly, grungy sounding distortion, and it's instantly familiar as the sound behind that 90s grunge. And of course, it's not identical because obviously amps and settings and guitars are different throughout the years, but you can definitely hear that sound in there. And I'm going to play with it a little bit more and try to dial some things in and get my ideal sound on this pedal. So that's pretty much spot on with what I would call the Distortion DS-1 sound. And just for reference, my level is right at 75% on the dial. Tone is about 45, and the distortion is about 55, 60. So they're kind of opposing one another. I find that that tone induces quite a bit of treble, and it takes out the bass. And one of the easier comparisons to make on this pedal board is the DS-1 to the DS-2 pedal. And just for reference, the level I have right about at the same exact spot, right around 75%, but I have the tone dropped all the way out, all the way down rather, and that's a bassier sound. It cuts the treble. So that's kind of the main difference, because then when you go to distortion, it's right around that 55, 60 on the dial again. So my settings are almost spot on except for that tone. So let's go ahead and hear these two pedals side by side with these settings that I've kind of chosen. Here's the DS-1 first. DS-1, now the DS-2. And now, after hearing that, I think that it actually needs a little bit more tone. So I'm going to wind that tone up and get out of that bassy basement and put things pretty close to even Steven with the settings on both the DS2 and the DS1. So here's the DS2 with a little bit of tone. DS1, kind of equal settings. So I would say that that's a little growlier and a little I don't want to say heavier because that's such a subjective word, but it's kind of the opposite of what I would have expected. The turbo distortion, having the word turbo in it, you'd think that would have a bit more gain, a bit more juice in the tank, but it's actually a little smoother, a little more subdued than the DS-1 if settings are apples to apples. And just an interesting comparison. Now, let's go ahead and compare the DS-1 against the Tube Screamer, because I use the Tube Screamer in a lot of different scenarios, and just for a reference on settings, we have 3 of similar settings on the Tube Screamer as we do on the DS-1. We have drive, which is the same as distortion. We have a tone dial and then a level. And on the Tube Screamer, my level is cranked 100% all the way, and the tone is at 75%, and the distortion is a little below 50, so slightly different settings. But let's go ahead and hear head-to-head DS-1 to Tube Screamer. It's the TS9. So here we go. First, the DS-1. Tube Screamer. Very different sounding distortion, and I would say that the distortion on the DS-1 is still a little more gainy than that of the TS9 on the Tube Screamer. So that's a really gainy pedal for being the first, the DS-1 in that lineage of pedals. So the last comparison that I'd like to do is the Super Overdrive, which is a similar circuit from what I understand to the DS-1, but it has a bit more gain on tap. So this might actually be a closer head-to-head, because this is a brand new DS-1. So maybe they've updated the circuit to have a little bit more gain in there. I don't know. The Super Overdrive that I have is a bit older, so let's see. DS-1 first. Here we go. SD1, Super Overdrive. It still seems gainier, higher gain than the Super Overdrive, which I keep the level right at 50%, the drive at 100%. I just crank the gain, and the tone, the drive I leave at 50%, a little higher, maybe 51 or 2%, with the tone all the way open. So that's more of that treble. But let's go ahead and see if we can match some settings on this pedal and see exactly what we can get just by playing around. So again, our level is at 75. Our tone is at 40, 45. Drive is about 55. Here's the DS-1 first, then the SD-1 second. SD-1! Yeah, I just do not like that tone dial biasing towards the bass on the SD-1. So I had to crank that up to about 75. And yeah, I think I like the pedal better kind of where it was. So again, this is not supposed to be an apples to apples. They're different pedals. They're supposed to sound different, and they do. And I'm not surprised by that. But I did want to do a little head-to-head comparison and ask yourself, well, why would you want 3 Boss distortion pedals on your pedal board, or 4 Boss distortion pedals on your pedal board? I happen to have 4 currently, if you include the metal zone. But I think that there's a distinct place, a distinct sound, and you can always, I've seen people have 2 distortion DS-1s on their pedal board and just have them to different settings. So they have great sounds throughout the range. So you can have more of like a brown sound, or like a woman sound, if you want to call it that, where you have the tone more biased to the bass. And then on the other one, you can have a more growly, trebly sound. So there's a lot of things that you can do. And I personally have been wanting this specific pedal because it really does have a lineage of being badass. And it certainly came through. I really like the sound with this amplifier. I'm sure it will sound even better through a 4x12 with 120 watts, like through the 5150 or something like that. But for this one comparison, it matches really well with the Celestion V30. All right, so the last thing that I'd like to do is a short loop where we listen to a couple of loops with this as the main lead channel. And I don't know, for me, it's more fun to have music that includes bass drums and a rhythm guitar. So that's why I put these together, and it gives you a different context to hear this pedal. So I'm just going to leave all the settings as is and just play a little lead over a few loops that I come up with here, and hopefully that'll give you a nice idea of what this pedal is capable of.